Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the guitarist, singer and songwriter. It is the one and only Jim Walters, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love, poetry and all that other groovy stuff. Was in the New York band Damen and has also been in various other combos, including the New United Monster Show and various other bits and pieces. Has worked with a lot of people, and yes, you're going to find out more about that and so much else. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to the exciting subject that was the early formative years. Jim, it's over to you.
Well, the very first album I ever bought with my own money as a kid was the White Album by the Beatles.
Right. God, that was very cool.
Yeah, it started, so that was a great start. Turned me on to so many different sounds, and it was beautiful. So that's kind of where I started. So I grew up about 9 miles outside of New York City.
Right.
And my father grew up as a chicken farmer about in like sort of central New Jersey, sort of like Bruce Springsteen country.
Yes.
So really the first music I ever heard was sort of like country music, like, really old school stuff like Dolly Parton, Johnny Cash, Mel Tillis, George Jones, that type of thing. So that was like the first music I kind of remember hearing.
Yes, quite scary then.
Yeah. And so then I kind of got into it. I had a friend, Pete Marshall, who was a childhood friend of mine, who went on to play with Iggy Pop and Glenn Danzig and Sam Hain. And he kind of got me into like the Stooges and the MC5 and the Clash and the Pistols and all that type of thing. He kind of opened up my ears and mind to that.
Yes. And did you have any older brothers or sisters that gave you any musical directions in life?
I do have an older brother, but he sort of liked poppier music than I did, although I did listen to it. But he never usually I know a lot of times it's a sibling, but he never really, it was more friends and actually my parents, my mother was like really into Elvis Presley. I still have like an original Blue Suede Shoes 45 that she had. She was kind of she was into rockabilly sort of.
Right.
Funny because when I was into, getting into the whole punk thing, when I would play the Cramps, my mother loved that because it reminded her of her, the music that she grew up with in a way, like filtered through other things.
Yes, A Date with Elvis. She'd have loved that album, wouldn't she? So that was all good. Yes, well, my parents, I mean, they had a funny kind of music taste. And I think my dad quite liked country and western, but it was a sort, it was like Boxcar Willie and Jim Reeves and Crystal Girl and those ones. And, it was quite grating at the time. I still haven't learned to love them, but obviously there's other country artists that one gets. But I think I've been emotionally scarred by Boxcar Willie. I do find that a little bit. So I haven't, and Jim Reeves was just like, oh my God, So it wasn't that brilliant. But then I was often, when you preschool listening to, I think in the kitchen with my mum, she'd have Radio 2 on, which was it was light music, but had things like the Carpenters and Burt Bacharach. So I became quite obsessed with that kind of music, and I loved the lyrics of the Carpenters from an early age. It had a profound effect on me. So, yes, the lyric was everything. So what year were you born then?
I was born in 1966.
Right. So yeah, because I was a bit too young really for punk rock, and to be honest, my older brother was really into prog rock. So I which was fantastically brilliant of him, wasn't it? So he gave again, years of listening to Yes and Genesis and Wishbone Ash and Vangelis and the solo work of Rick Wakeman. Didn't help me at all when I got into later life in the 80s. I had to sort of push that to one side, but I've sort of got a fondness with it. I just can't believe how self-indulgent it all sounds, really. So, but yes, it doesn't age well. But then, so when did you get a guitar, or when did you start to sort of play a musical instrument?
Probably, I think around 13 or 14. I started, and I, started playing with the guys in my neighborhood, and we would, just like learn Who songs or Clash or, the Sex Pistols or whatever we could play, anything that had like 3 or 4 chords to it, we could get like the kind of the basic idea of it.
Yes. So when did punk come onto your radar if you were born 66?
Probably through my friend Pete Marshall, as I mentioned. He was always like, he always had great ears, and he kind of tuned me on to all that stuff that kind of happened a few years, a little bit younger. I was a little young for it, but I kind of picked up on it quick a couple years after it happened.
Yes.
And then we kind of got into the hardcore punk scene in New York and New Jersey, because that was kind of happening at that time.
Yeah. And how did you come across the White Album? Because during I mean, it was kind of strange during the 70s.
Yeah.
Because to be honest, my brother also had, from the mid 50s, mid 70s, he did have Sergeant Pepper, which, probably 74, 75 time. And you sort of realize the Beatles had only just broken up, and that there wasn't any cultural significance about that album at the time. But I was obsessed with it. But the White Album's quite an obscure one.
Yeah, I really don't know, to be honest. It just kind of spoke to me, I guess. I picked that because it was so much incredible music on there, but I can't really tell you why. Sometimes, when you're young, you don't even know why you do things. You just do them.
Well, absolutely. So then when you got to sort of like 1980, you were just 14 at the time. Had you started going to gigs at this point?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I was living right outside Manhattan, so I would go with my friends, and the very first show I saw was Kiss at Madison Square Garden.
Blimey.
Yeah, and that was pretty wild. But my ears always, like, I always had sort of different groups of friends that I could listen to different music with. Like, I've had friends that I could listen to like punk rock and hardcore punk rock with. I had other friends I would listen to like the Beatles and Bowie with. I would have other friends that I could listen to, I don't know, like, the country music that I got from my dad, or Joni Mitchell. Or I always had, like, from a pretty early age, I always had pretty wide ears. Melody is kind of like a big thing for me. Anything with a good melody, always, regardless. I feel like a lot of music, the trappings are different, but they're, the emotional similarities, the content sometimes is a lot more similar than you would think.
Oh, yes. I mean, I guess it does all go back to people like Buddy Holly, doesn't it? And Elvis and Little Richard and, Eddie Cochran, people like that. It's just variations, really, isn't it? So at that stage, had you sort of become aware of things like CBGBs and Max's Kansas City?
Absolutely. Yeah. Max's, I never made it to Max's. I always thought I was too young. And then later on, I met friends that had gone, that were the same age as me, that lived in this. I lived a little outside the city, but I had friends in Manhattan was like, oh, yeah, 13, 14, you could totally go to Max's. And I always thought I wouldn't be able to get in. So I never went. But CBGBs, yeah, they used to have these hardcore punk rock matinees in the afternoons. You could go. We would do that a lot. There was this club called A7 in New York that I went to a few times. It was like a legendary hardcore punk rock club. I was grateful that I got to see that, because that was pretty amazing. It was like a really tiny, you'd see these bands play like in a club that's like literally like the size of your living room. It was really fun.
A7 Club, New York.
Yeah.
Blimey, you're right. Have you come across several people who've been writing their memoirs? I think her name, Andrea Yeager, has just written a book, which is kind of growing up in New York. And from your sort of period, have you sort of stumbled on some of these publications that's just come out?
I've seen a few. I don't know her. I know her name, but I'm not familiar with her. I'll have to check.
Yes. Well, yes, I mean, she certainly is quite the groovy person. So then when you get to sort of the early 80s, this is the Reagan period, things start to change musically. In this country, the UK, we had the punk, post-punk, then we had sort of goth and new romantic. There was the new Paisley scene that happened. And then, like 83, there was kind of indie pop started to emerge in this country with bands like the Smiths, And then
Mhm.
people like there was The Cure, Susan the Banshees, the Cult, and eventually The Mission and people like that. Were you
Right.
sort of picking up on what was coming or going on in the UK at this stage?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I always used to read like Sounds and Enemy, Melody Maker. So my friends and I, yeah, we were definitely tried to stay on top of that as much. We were always kind of Anglophiles too, and so definitely, yeah, was definitely in tune with all that. We tried to listen to as much music as possible.
And did MTV play a big part on your teenage years at this stage? Because that was about 83, wasn't it? 84?
Yeah, I mean, everybody at that time, it was interesting. I think I turned it, someone called me and said, "Oh, you have to check this out." So I think I saw like the third or fourth video that they aired. And it was like a weird mix. I think maybe it was like the Buggles or something like that I saw.
Yes.
But yeah, and it was they played the same videos over and over and over because they didn't have a lot of content. So
Well, it's
like,
quite interesting. That's why I was really surprised coming to America, and they had some really odd, like a flock of seagulls that were really huge, and it was like, why? And it was like, oh yes, the MTV thing where they just had that on rotation, and probably the Buggles as well. And it's like, oh, anybody who had a video just really got sort of thrown on, and still to this day, I think people like that and the Men Without Hats are still touring the sort of the strange areas and up and down America because they've got this cult following there.
mm-hmm. We when we played in Toronto, I think it was Toronto. Was it Montreal? I think it was Toronto. We used to hang out. The main guy from Men Without Hats, we used to hang out with when we would play up there. He's a great guy.
Yes, God, well, I interviewed him last year because he was, he was part of my teenage formative years. And I did like the song, I have to say,
Oh yeah,
and
that's catchy. Absolutely.
it's a great one. I don't know why Status Quo covered it; it was a bad decision.
Oh, I
But
didn't. I'll have to check that out.
the quote,
You listen back to some of that '80s music. It is so bizarre in like the best way. It was a very creative time.
yeah, I mean, there was kind of, I think the production sound changed quite a lot during the 80s. I guess technology was
Yeah.
moving forward, and you had that Trevor Horn. He was one of those producers, a bit like in the past, you'd have people like Mickey Most or Phil Spector, or, a producer who just created this kind of trademark. And so you had that very stark kind of bass, didn't you? Gated reverb or something people
Yeah.
mention.
Mm-hmm.
And it
Absolutely.
does, and sometimes when I listen back to some of those records, it does sound a bit dated or a bit sort of sterile. You had, was it Tina Turner had a particular sound, and Frankie Goes to Hollywood, and ABC, and then all those bands came along, which, yes, you could really put them in that period. So when you got to sort of 18, do you leave college school at this stage, or do you stay on for further education?
Well, I moved to Manhattan and started going to college when I was 17, and started the band that I was in, my first like serious band, Damen. And went on my first tour, I think when I was 18 or 19. And
Right.
so it was kind of living this crazy life where I was still going to school, but I was in a band that was touring and playing all the time and recording and stuff. It was it was a really wonderful time. It was crazy, but a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, imagine. So how does your first band get to sort of, how does it form? Is it people that you'd known for a few years, or were they people you'd bumped into in clubs?
Basically it was people that I bumped into. So I went to New York University, NYU in Manhattan, and I lived in this dormitory called the Weinstein Dormitory, which is kind of like I think someone even wrote a book about the dormitory. It was wild because I met two of the Lyle Hyson and Dave Motamed. I met them there, and Rick Rubin lived there.
Right.
He kind of started his whole empire there. So we rehearsed in the basement of this college dormitory, and so did the Beastie Boys, and you would see like members of Run DMC and Slayer and Slick Rick walking around. It was kind of like very much like a rock and roll college. It was pretty funny.
My God, it was like the kids from Fame.
Kind of, yeah.
That's amazing. And did
Mhm.
you get the sound quite quickly? Did the band sort of gel quite fast?
I think it took a little while. We were just kind of coming out of the punk rock scene. We were kind of, I think our ideas were a little ahead of like what we could actually play, but we figured it out, and it was just like very old school. We'd go in a rehearsal room and pound it out.
Yes, absolutely. And
But
who brought the name to the musical combo?
it is a strange name. I think Alex, the other guitar player. So Das Damen means like the women in German. And I guess we all had like really long hair, and so it was kind of like a play on that, because everyone said, you look like a girl with long hair kind of thing. So,
Right.
yeah, so I think Alex came up with that originally.
And was your first release, was that on Ecstatic Peace Records?
Yes, it was.
Is that let's have a look. Was that a particular label that was, it was Thurston Moore.
Yes. So Thurston was a friend and, early supporter of the band. He actually wrote, the first record. So maybe we'll talk about it later, but we just got rights back to a lot of our material that we didn't have for a long time. And we reissued our first EP with like bonus tracks and things like that. And Thurston wrote some nice liner notes and everything for that. But
Right.
he kind of just let us borrow the label. Like he didn't really, he's like, oh, we need somewhere to put this out. He's like, oh, you can use my label. But we kind of did all the promotion and all that kind of stuff. He was just kind of like being a friend and helping us out.
Yes. And what studio did you use for your first recordings?
We went to Fun City. It was a guy named Wharton Tears. He was a pretty renowned character in the New York scene. He recorded like Dinosaur Jr. I think he recorded Sonic Youth and a bunch of New York bands. He was involved with Glenn Branca.
Right.
And so we recorded, he had like a basement studio, and we went over there and, blasted it out. We played very loud for a long time.
Yes, because I did an interview a few years ago with a guy who he's got a studio and he's a producer, a musician, Martin BC
Oh, yeah.
Studio.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever go there and record anything?
We didn't. I mean, he was around. I definitely knew him, but I don't know why we never worked together. But yeah, I was very familiar with Martin. Yeah, we were kind of in the same scene.
Yes, such a cool dude.
Yeah.
So when you sort of got your EP, was that when you first started touring outside New York at this point?
Yeah, we sort of made this EP, self-financed, with Thurston's help on, with the label. And we just sort of booked some shows and, real DIY and like hit the road and went across the country. I think our first show was in Cleveland, I want to say.
Blimey, that sounds really Spinal Tap.
It kind of was. we found our way to the stage pretty well, but it was just, we had, we knew friends in certain areas. We would play a show with them. Like there was a band called the Necros in Toledo, and they let us open for them at one of their shows. And we just kind of, we had we had a friend of the band. He was kind of an infamous character. He just passed away a little while ago, named Dylan Cole. And he was sort of like a eccentric genius. And so I was like 18 and I think Dylan was 14. And
Right.
he actually booked our tour and came with us. And we had to have like a guardianship letter from his parents allowing him to come with us. And at 14 years old, he booked like this, pretty much cross-country tour. It was pretty wild.
It was, God, that he must have had an amazing... Did he go into the world of music did he stay with music after that?
No, he kind of went into the world of crime after that. But
it was such a shame. He would have with that kind of CV at 14, it would have been amazing.
I know. He had an amazing mind. It's unfortunate that he could have done a lot of incredible things, but he kind of went down an alternative path.
Yes, so once this EP came out,
Mm-hmm.
Did you sort of, was there quite a, lot of interest from different record labels at this stage?
It was kind of a different time. It was, like the underground thing was very underground. Like not a lot of people really thought about like making a living as an indie band or anything. I mean, you really just did it for the love of the music. We sent our, shows how long ago this was. We sent cassettes around to different labels, and we sent one to SST Records, and they liked our record, and they saw that we were really worked hard and would play all these, bars in the middle of nowhere, saw that we had a good work ethic, and they called us up. And we said, we'd like to see you guys play. We're interested in having you on the label. And as a, 18-year-old guy or whatever, I mean, that still like was one of the great thrills to get a call from them, because we loved that label, and Black Flag and Husker Du and the Meat Puppets and the Minutemen. I mean, such incredible music came from that label.
Yes.
So we went on a tour, and we played in Chicago with Big Black band. And I believe, I want to say he lit off firecrackers on the stage when they were playing. So I remember my ears like really ringing after the show. And then we drove, I feel like it was all night. I know we had like a long drive. We kind of played with Big Black, stayed with Steve, slept a couple hours, and then drove to East Lansing, Michigan to open up for Black Flag. So we played Big Black one night, the next night Black Flag. And because they wanted to see us, they said, we want to see you live before we sign you. And, Black Flag crowds are pretty wild. It's just like 80s, 80s Black Flag. It was kind of crazy, but it was a great show. And then after that, they said, yeah, we like you guys, and we'd like you to be on the label.
Blimey. Did you, were you a good live band, by the way?
Definitely very energetic. I think it got better over time for sure. But we had our moments. I've had people tell me a lot of nice things. It's always hard for me to judge, but I don't know if it was consistent. I think sometimes it was good. It was at the time, it was just more about the energy and just like throwing down really hard. I think we got more musical as we moved on, but we had something happening, something unique, I think.
Yes. And were they, the members of the band, were you all sort of pulling in the same direction at this stage? Was it all sort of quite harmonious?
Yeah, for the most part it was at that time, yeah.
So when you went to record your first album, which was, is it Jupiter Eye on SST Records? Mm-hmm. Who was the kind of, what was the creative process of the band? Who was doing the writing and who was doing the music of it? Or was it coming together as a sort of unit, sort of rehearsing and jamming?
Well, it's interesting because for the first EP, Alex, the other guitar player, he and I were like, at the time, were like the main writers and singers and guitar players. And Alex was a little more experienced than I was. He had been, like, I'd been playing and stuff like that. But like I said, we were playing covers and stuff like that. I was just kind of getting into writing. And Alex had been playing. They were Alex, Lyle, and Dave, the other guys, were in a kind of like a hardcore band called The Misguided.
Right.
And they were like a little bit more experienced than me. So Alex had a lot of material already written when we did the EP, and he actually asked me to sing a bunch of the songs. He was really kind of generous with his material on the first record. It was kind of sweet. The second record, so originally we had Dave Motamed in the band. We did a bunch of demos and stuff, and then he ended up leaving, and we had a childhood friend of mine, Phil Carter, joined the band for our first EP, and he wrote as well. And he played this crazy 8-string bass, so the sound kind of got heavier.
Right.
And the second album, the first album, second release, it was kind of more collaborative, like whatever, we all brought stuff in and we all worked on it together. And, it was a pretty bands aren't often democracies, but it was a pretty harmonious democracy at that point.
Yes. So when you came to do Jupiter Eye, there's two sides, aren't there, to this? The grey side and black side. Had you sort of come up with a concept at this stage for that release?
Well, there was a song on there called Grays and Black. So
Yes.
it was sort of a takeoff on that. It's funny. We were friends with a lot of contemporary bands. And later on, we used to tour with the Screaming Trees a lot.
Oh, yes.
And they were dear friends of ours, and we played many, many shows together. And I reconnected with Mark Lanigan. I saw him at a music festival in Atlanta about a year or so before he passed. And we were texting and stuff. And he wrote me and he goes, "Do you remember that song, Grays and Black? I love that song." And he goes, "I even wrote a couple songs kind of inspired by that." And it was so sweet. And that was like one of the last texts I got from him before he passed.
Oh my God, that's amazing, isn't it? Yes. Yeah. And were you pleased with the results of the album? Was that a sort of generally something that you all felt like, oh yes, production-wise, that they've got us?
Jupiter Eye?
No, yes, Jupiter Eye.
I like Jupiter Eye. I didn't. It was kind of done quickly, so I wasn't like 1,000% excited by it, but I was happy with the songs. But yeah, no, I like it. I mean, you always look back and there are things you wish you did differently. But it's funny because also going to school at NYU at the time was Jay Mascis from Dinosaur,
right?
Who we were friends with, and we actually just toured with Dinosaur not too long ago. The reformed Damen, and while we were working on Jupiter Eye, he was working on You're Living All Over Me. So we were like playing each other mixes and, doing musician-y kind of stuff together. It was fun.
Yes, amazing. And how was the 80s kind of shaping up? Because this was like 86, 87, wasn't it? And in this country, I sort of felt that things started to change quite a lot during the sort of latter part of the 80s. I think the ecstasy world came along, and then a lot of those bands that I liked were kind of splitting up at that point, and there was definitely a bit of a shift in music. And then you had that wonderful hair metal period, and you had Bruce Springsteen with his Born in the USA.
Right. Yeah.
It was all getting very sort of biceps, wasn't it? Biceps and muscular at this point. What was it like kind of for you as a musician, or had you just kind of ignored that scene?
No, I mean, we were aware of it. I mean, we always, even if it was stuff we weren't into, we were always kind of would try and be aware of what was happening. It was interesting because at that time, again, I feel like the world, the way they say, the world's oldest man, the Mel Brooks thing. There was no internet, and underground was like really underground. You know what I mean? Like the alternative scene. So it was almost like, when people say, "Oh yeah, I remember the '80s, like Poison and all these American like hair metal bands," and to me, I'm thinking about like Black Flag and the Bad Brain. Like to me, like I lived like almost like totally in an alternative world than what a lot of people think of it as that time. Although I was still aware of it.
Yeah, I sort of had that thought a few years ago when the 80s was portrayed by a couple of commentators, and it was like, Thatcher, it was the sort of new romantic period, it was Live Aid. And I remember thinking, that wasn't my 80s at all. I did go to Live Aid, but I thought the lineup was terrible. I was one of those people who was quite miserable going, this is a terrible lineup. And I probably still do. But, it was like, but then I realized there's all these tribes and everybody was like, you had the political scene, which was like the right, were just, all feeling very, loads of money, and it was all very big hair, big shoulder pads, a bit sort of, Dallas meets Dynasty or something like that. And people were sort of hitting that stock market and making a bit of cash. So there was a sort of optimism until it all went. And then there was everybody else on the left who was sort of feeling a bit poor and broke. And at the same time, I think why there was a lot of bands in this country is that we had this, social security and unemployment benefits. So you could sort of claim dole and housing benefit and council tax. And to be honest, it didn't seem like there was much. It was quite a poor time in this country. So I think most people just thought, well, there was no opportunity, so we'll just form bands and just put on gigs and put on fanzines. So that kind of bizarrely, that scene has helped create all that kind of indie pop music that people are now getting quite excited about, which is quite interesting.
Yeah.
Because did you ever sort of, when you toured, did you ever come out and do Europe or the UK at all?
We were on, see what labels were we on? We were on a label called What Goes On in England. Trying to remember. I was on the cover of Sounds magazine.
Brilliant.
Yeah. We toured Europe a lot. Used to play at, we played with at a bunch of different venues. I remember we played at the Fulham Greyhound. We played, I'm trying to remember, I think we played in Manchester, I want to say Leeds, Newcastle.
Was that the Duchess in Leeds?
I think so. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. And we played, I guess because of our name, we would do, like, if we would come over we'd play like 18 dates in Germany. Like, it was crazy. And we played in Holland and Sweden and Netherlands. And
did you play in Berlin?
Yes, we did.
And what was that like in the 80s?
It was wild. It was a lot of fun. We played one New Year's Eve in Berlin that was kind of crazy, and there were like fire eaters and people going nuts and stuff. It was a lot of fun.
Was that the Metropolitan or Metropolis?
I think so. I want to say it was. We used to play the U4 club in Vienna.
So you got quite a good following in Europe.
Yeah, we did. We did pretty well. We did well. They treated us well. It was a lot of fun.
Yes. So when you came to do your second album for SST, was there sort of a bit of a honeymoon feeling at this stage?
Yeah, I feel like the third album we kind of hit our stride, really.
Was that Mousetrap or?
That was Triskaidekaphobe.
Right. So this is the one. Who came up with that amazing album cover?
Well, funnily enough, so Dave Motamed, who was the original bass player, wasn't in the band anymore, but he was still friends of the band. I think he actually found that picture, the picture of Kali, I think it is.
Right.
And then Triskaidekaphobe means fear of the number 13.
Right.
And that was Alex, the guitar player. He was very into that kind of vibe and imagery, so we used that. And we recorded that. We still work with Wharton Tears, but we also recorded at Waterfront Studios. And it was interesting because I felt like musically we were definitely, it's like the classic thing. It's like the band's third album. They start to really, get comfortable and kind of hit their stride. But so we were working, I want to say during the day in the studio, Waterfront Studios in Hoboken, New Jersey, right outside Manhattan.
Yes.
And in the evening, Lenny Kravitz was recording his first record.
Blimey.
I think he might even have still been called Romeo Blue. I'm not sure. And so we would pass each other when we were, coming and going, and he'd be like, "Hey man, can I play you some of the stuff I worked on?" And I was like, "Oh, sure, Lenny, let me hear it." Kind of like his first record, but it's a little bit more raw maybe, but similar. And I was like, "Wow, this is really cool stuff. Good luck with it." To aspiring musicians, I didn't know he was going to be like world famous a couple years later, but he was very sweet, and we would see each other a lot. That was a fun experience.
Oh, I'd imagine, because he played a funny little show in Norwich when he was just making it. And he was, bizarrely, Suzanne Vega at that stage was absolutely massive. She'd sort of brought that first album, which was produced by Lenny Kaye. And it was a really lovely interview with her and Lenny, where they were still recording it or finishing it. And they were just like, going through the paces and doing the vocals and thinking they'd sell about 20,000. And then suddenly it just took off. It was one of those albums that just did so well. And she played in Norwich at this kind of event that was being filmed, and some friends went to see her and said, "Oh God, the support act was a bit heavy. It was Lenny Kravitz. He was giving it everything he had, for the TV cameras for the BBC, I think, and he was doing his little bit during that, because I think her album came out about 86 time, 87. So her classic one at that point. So at that point, had you done your EP, which was this one, Marshmallow Conspiracy? Was that something that had that been released before your second album?
So I think what SST liked to do is they used to like what they used to call a maxi single, like a 12-inch,
Right.
and they would take a single from the album that you were about to release, and then people would put like a B-side or whatever, it would be like some throwaway track. But we decided to really do something special, and so we put Bug, which was one of the singles from Triskaidekaphobe, and then we did a couple of new tracks, and we did this song 555 from Triskaidekaphobe. We got Wayne Kramer from the MC5 to play on it. We did like a different version, and that was really amazing because we were such big fans. And then we did this Beatles cover, and that got us into a lot of trouble with the Jackson estate at the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
How did that? What was the story behind that?
Well, it sounds a little quaint now, but at the time, it was a period where Michael Jackson had purchased the rights to the Beatles songs, and he had licensed them to some commercials. And we were, as the young guys that we were kind of, for that time, offended by that. And we thought it was really horrible of him to do that. Now it's funny. Now bands vie to get their music on stuff. But at the time, we found it offensive. So we were trying to, fight the good fight, I guess, in our own naive minds. And so we did this. So the Minutemen, another fellow SST band, had a song called Song for Michael Jackson to Sing on one of their records. So we recorded Magical Mystery Tour and gave it like a fake title, Song for Michael Jackson to Sell.
Right.
And put it out. And SST, to their credit, put it out and went along with it. And then they were not happy that we did that and made us withdraw all the albums, and I think SST had to pay them some money, and it was, not really a great move. But
no, this is so tricky. How did that affect the band at this stage?
It was a little stressful. I know, just financially, it wasn't, we were, it was like an elephant kind of crushing an ant, but I think it definitely put some financial pressure on us, and it was a little bit of a weird stigma for a while. But I don't think, a lot of people said that ruined the band, or it didn't really, in my mind. It was just kind of a thing that we went through, and it was kind of, it was what it was. It was of the time. Like, would I do that again? Of course not. But,
no.
That was the spirit. That was the spirit of the time, So,
yes. Had Michael Hawley had his Pepsi moment at this point?
I think he had, and I did hear from the SST lawyers that he actually heard the track. So I said, did he hear it? He goes, yes, he's heard it. So I knew that. So I was like, wow, Michael Jackson, in a way I was like excited, like, wow, Michael Jackson heard it.
I know, this is it. Because I know that I think Neil Young had done a track, hadn't he? This Notes for You, where he sings that song, I'm not going to play for Pepsi. I'm not going to play,
And that, sure. I mean, he did it a lot more eloquently than we did, but that was the idea.
That was good. So what was so you were then off SST Records? Did they had you sort of done your contract at this stage? And
yeah, I mean, we toured after that. We did a lot of touring. Went to Europe again. I think that's when I was on the cover of Sounds. We did well. I mean, we toured a lot. I mean, we would tour. I found an old Das Damen concert shirt, had our tour dates on the back, and it was I think 26 shows in 28 days, with like the 2 off days being travel days.
Blimey.
We worked like, it's funny because I have friends now, and they're, they'll do like, 4 or 5 shows. They're like, I'm doing a tour. And I'll be like, that's not a tour. In my day, we would be. But,
yeah, well, I find the same with when you hear about bands doing a residency in Vegas, and you think that's just 4 nights. How comes that? That's not a residency, surely.
Yeah,
and it's a little bit. The whole thing's quite different now, isn't it?
The part is we had, was it overwork? Probably, but it definitely instilled like a great work ethic, which I still have. I still work hard. So
yeah, well, it's interesting because I don't know if you've heard that the Searchers, who've been going since 1957. I mean, they're one of those bands, like the pop side of the 60s, but they all just kept going, and they're playing Glastonbury Festival in June. They're all in their 80s now, and they said, they just said that that was. They weren't going to make any more money, with the records, and they probably didn't have a very good record deal anyway. So if they wanted to be musicians and that was their job, they were going to have to just go and play the circuit, and the summer circuit, the winter circuit, at all those venues. And I think they just said, well, I'm not going to get a proper job. I'm going to be a musician. So off you go.
That's
great. It's brilliant. And I just think the fact that they're all such old men who started in sort of, I think, late 50s, they're going to finish at Glastonbury Festival. I think it'll be quite extraordinary, really. I mean, when you think that they've been around for that long, and they're going to knock it out and just, I mean, their great-grandchildren will be there watching it at that stage.
That's so cool.
It is very cool. So then, yes, Mousetrap. This is on, is it on Twin Tone Records?
So after touring and stuff, so Phil, the bass player, left, and Dave Motama, the original bass player, came back in the band. And we did Mousetrap. I was on Twin Tone, and that was a Minneapolis label. So we were, doing shows with, bands like Soul Asylum. We did a bunch of gigs with them, and we were, hanging out with people like, Grant Hart from Husker Du, and that whole scene.
Yes, my God, Husker Du were kind of my favorite band, really, for that period. They were just amazing.
Still sound great, amazing.
They are, and Greg's got his new band, Ultra Bomb.
Pardon me?
Greg's got his new band, hasn't he? Ultra Bomb.
I haven't heard them yet.
They sound very like Husker Du. So
nice.
Yes, he's doing well. He's done his kind of, I don't know, some sort of prostate cancer or something, and survived it, and is now sort of back on the circuit. I think he's going to be. I think last year they did that sort of punk bowling event at Vegas, and the classic one there at that point. So what? Yeah. So the late 80s, suddenly, but then 4AD records came along, and there was the Pixies, then there was Bleach, and then that world of grunge, and you mentioned Soul Asylum, and again, the sound was starting to change again during that point.
But
were you excited as a musician at this point?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we were kind of in our own little bubble, but we were also very excited, and we were, we toured so much, so we knew people from different areas. Like we knew Steve Albini and the guys from Urge Overkill in Chicago, and we knew Ian Mackay and the bunch of the Discord guys from Washington D.C., and we Scratch Acid in Texas, and Jeff from the Butthole Surfers, and in Los Angeles we knew the guys from Red Cross and and all the SST guys, because that was our label, and then Minneapolis, all those cats.
Have you seen the Red Cross film?
I haven't. I've seen the Red Cross guys recently. I hadn't seen them in a little bit, and they sounded amazing. That is next on my list. I'll probably see it this week.
Oh, it's absolutely amazing. It's quite the thing, really, and just the nicest people ever, really.
Cool. You interviewed Steve not too long ago, right?
Yes, and Jeff.
Okay. Yeah, I saw their very first New York show. We were fans. We liked I think, Teen Babes and Monsanto records. So we went and introduced ourselves to them, and I met them the very first time they came to New York.
How come you're not on this compilation called If I Were a Carpenter, which was kind of featured all those people like Sonic Youth and Red Cross and Sheryl Crow and the Cranberries, but it was quite a New York-y vibe, wasn't it, to that tribute to the Carpenters?
I think Das Damen had broken up at that point.
Right.
I always said Das Damen started too early and ended too early. Like, I think we started like a thing that I think we were a little, I mean, it wasn't always executed perfectly, but I think we sort of started a certain sound a little earlier than a lot of people. And then I feel like once it actually started to become like semi-mainstream or whatever, I think the band broke up before we were able to reap the benefits of it, like in the early 90s.
Yes, because I did a interview with the producer who kind of created the sound of the 90s. He did the first Red Hot Chili Peppers, but then it was Soul Asylum and sound. What was that?
Michael Beinhorn?
Yes, that's the man.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, so he, that kind of sound that he, like I mentioned about Trevor Horn or Mickey Most or Phil Spector, they have that moment, don't they, where they must be like, God, I'm on the zeitgeist at this point.
Yeah, I think we were a little ahead of the geist, I think. It's funny. We were playing at this, I think there's a club called the Pipeline in New Jersey with the Rollins band.
Right.
And we opened for them, and we were kind of feeling like bands have like kind of lulls, and we were kind of feeling like we were grinding our wheels a little bit. And Henry Rollins, do you know what a 7-Eleven is?
No.
It's like it's like an American convenience store where they sell like energy drinks and soda and burritos and stuff. We all went there after the show to get some snacks, and we were talking to Henry and kind of saying, I don't know, man, I don't know if we should keep going. And he gave us like this inspirational speech in this 7-Eleven.
Excellent.
And while eating a Klondike bar, which is like this ice cream, it's like American. And he's like, you know who you guys need? You need to get a producer. You need to get Gil Norton. He would know what to do with you guys, and it would be amazing. And it turned, which we didn't do, but he was the guy that turned out, he did the breakthrough Foo Fighters album.
Right.
And Henry really got us hyped up, and it kept the band going for like another year and a half or so because of him. I was always grateful to him for that. But then we did the album Mousetrap. We did an EP called High Anxiety with Paul Coldery and Sean Slade, and those guys did like Radiohead, and they've done so many things at Fort Apache Studios in Boston, legendary studio. And we still toured like crazy, and then we kind of stopped. And then we did one of the last things we did. We opened for Nirvana on the Nevermind tour.
Brilliant.
Which was pretty amazing. They were great, great people and amazing live. And we did that and a few other fun things. And then we played Berlin on New Year's Eve and Vienna on New Year's Day. And then we called it a day for the band.
God, so was that 92, the first day in 92 you were?
I think so. I think it was New Year's Eve 91, I want to say, and New Year's Day 92.
My God. It's interesting, isn't it? Because a few British bands had sort of been in the indie pop world in the 80s and had thought, we're just going to, it's all over. And then they kind of finish, and then Britpop starts, and it's like, we should have, they kind of, if only we kept it going a bit longer.
Because we had, certain bands, I think that's their legacy. I had a lot of very great people say nice things about the band. Like Chris Cornell was a big fan of Das Damen. Peter Buck has said some really wonderful things to me. People, so that always meant a lot to me. So like I said, we were, I think, maybe a little ahead of the curve or something. I don't know, or just our timing wasn't right, and so we sort of stopped right as that kind of our style of music started to become like viable. You know, it's funny. I remember in like 1985 or six, recording some demos, and the engineer kind of looked like Jerry Garcia, and he had this pipe, and he's like, loud music with melodic vocals, that will never work.
Oh, bless him. Yes, there you go. So then
Right.
what do you do for the rest of 92? What's the rest of your year like?
I think I did. So after Das Damen, I had a couple of bands, local bands with some friends. I had a band with my cousin who was an amazing drummer, did some stuff. And just did odds and ends. I did some fun things. Like I wrote some songs with Gordon Gano from the Violent Femmes. He and
Yes.
I co-wrote some songs together that never came out or anything, but it was a wonderful experience to do that with him. He's so talented. What else? I was in a band called New United Monster Show with John, who was the singer of The Fluid.
I've never ever come across The Fluid.
Oh, you'd love them. They're great. They were on Sub Pop. You should definitely check them out. And they were a great band. And so I was with him, and the drummer was Frank Farrar, who was the drummer for Guns N' Roses, and it was kind of like a alternative kind of hard rock band. Really, that was good. We did a bunch of great stuff. What else? I played with David Johansen from the New York Dolls.
Blimey, that must have been fantastic.
Yeah, I was so sad that his passing. I was texting with he and his wife Mara like a week before he passed.
Yes, gosh.
That was great. So, I kept busy, just doing lots of stuff and writing and producing and, kind of behind.
And did you stay in New York at this stage?
Stayed in New York, and then I did a bunch of different things. Like I worked for Robert De Niro, the actor, as like a personal assistant.
My God.
And so
because Robert De Niro in the 80s, we all went to see Taxi Driver and Mean Street, and
sure.
he was such a, the man, wasn't he? What was he? Was this in the 90s? You were his personal assistant?
Yeah. Well, I was one of it. He had a few. I was one of a few.
What does a personal assistant do, by the way?
It really could be anything that you can imagine. He was very nice. He was nice. I mean, obviously a man of few words, like you would imagine, but he was nice, and he was, a thoughtful guy. But someone at that level, they have stuff going on all the time. You run errands or help with different things, and
yes. And was he making any films during your period with him?
I think it was right after Goodfellas, so it might have been like maybe Bronx Tale, maybe Stanley and Iris.
Had he done Casino?
Casino, I think, was later. Cape Fear. How I got the job is my roommate and dear friend Phil Morrison, who's a film director. He was working for him as well, and I was kind of just like a musician not doing anything. So he was like, "Hey, you want to run some errands for Bob and get paid?" And I'm like, "Sure." So take his car and run uptown and drop something off the Apollo Theater or something. You never know, something random.
Yes.
And it was a lot of fun. And my roommate, we got to see all one of his jobs was to log all the takes for Cape Fear. So I would sit with him while he did it, and you could see all the different takes of the scenes and stuff. It was really cool.
Blimey, God, that's such a harrowing film.
Oh yeah, no, it was, and it was interesting to see how, because it was kind of like the uncut footage, like the behind the scenes, and you could see how Bob would be like, he'd be like a little goofy sometimes, just to kind of like cut the tension, or other times he'd stay in character to amp things up. It was really interesting to see his process. He's a genius.
Yes. And then were you still excited about the music scene during that mid to late?
Whether I was having like great success or not, I was always, always feel very creative and connected to it.
Yes. I mean, did you go to Woodstock 99? That's the $1 million question.
Not, I did not. I was actually, I remember being in a rehearsal with one of maybe it was the United Monster Show, I'm not sure. And I remember we were listening to it on the radio.
Yes. And have you seen the film?
I haven't. Speaking of harrowing, I've heard it's pretty harrowing, so I haven't seen it.
It's exhausting. I'm absolutely quite shattered and traumatized, and because the 90s change. I mean, if you ever look at the front covers of the Rolling Stone magazine, and in this country we had Loaded and various other, it all becomes so pornographic, doesn't it? The 90s. By the end, it's not looking great. It starts with the early 90s, very sensitive, everyone being thoughtful. Ends with this kind of wow, this is just terrible.
Sure.
So it's not good. So then the Millennium Bug, we survived that. So how do you then do the 2000s?
2000s. Well, I got married. So I'm married to BB Buell.
Right.
So we met and married in 2002. So by default, I became her guitar player and musical director. So I play with her, and we moved up to Portland, Maine, and was in a band called Vacationland with a bunch of guys from Portland. Really cool band that made one album that I think is great. It's on Spotify and all that type of thing. Played with them for a while, and then moved back to New York, and I think that's when I played with David Johansen. And
right.
Then was still doing stuff with BB. She was playing a lot, and we made 3 albums together. And what else? BB, her book came out.
Yes, that's it. That's because I think I'd sort of come across. I mean, everyone's getting their books out at the moment, aren't they? There's a lot of them.
She put out her second book not too long ago.
Right.
Her first book was a New York Times bestseller, actually. I came in just on the tail end of it. Like I'm like in the very end of the book, and I met her just like when she was finishing it up.
So is the second book Rebel Soul?
Yeah, first one was Rebel Heart, second one's Rebel Soul.
Blimey, O'Reilly! So God, you're an amazing rock and roll couple.
She's you were actually, and so then after that we moved to Nashville.
What was the reason for the move?
Well, I'll tell you, my mom and dad had passed away, and all the family that I had kind of moved back to New York to be. We moved back to New York partially because my father was ill, and also because I was asked to. Bob, Mr. De Niro, was opening up a hotel in New York, and they asked me to help open it.
Yes.
So I came back, worked for him again, which was great. Made 2 records with BB, and then my dad passed. And then for once in my life, I really wasn't doing a whole hell of a lot. I usually have 50 projects, and I was kind of just kind of chilling. I didn't really know what I was doing. And BB got hired to sing on an Eddie Arnold tribute album in Nashville. And she went down for the weekend and came back, and she said, "Man, it's amazing down there. I think we should move to Nashville." And I was like, well, I mean, I played there in the 80s and it was fun. I had fond memories. And she goes, no, I really think we should do it. So it sounds kind of crazy, but we kind of sold everything and packed up and moved to Nashville.
God, there you go. And
here we are 11 years later.
God, and I think Taylor Swift did something, but I think she was much younger at that stage, wasn't she? She crazed her parents to go to Nashville to sing country music. So there you go.
She's one of the queens here. And it's funny you mentioned Crystal Gale earlier, because I did some work with Crystal down here. So,
blimey, is she still alive?
Yeah, she looks beautiful, and she sings like a bird, and she's still going strong. I might actually talk with someone about possibly doing something with her in the future.
God, that's amazing. Yes. Yeah. So musically then, you're still doing lots of projects.
Yeah. Well, exciting, Das Damen, we got a bunch of our masters back, and we re-released our first EP. Like I was saying, had a bunch of fun guests on it, like Des Cadena from Black Flag, and Gary Lee from the Screaming Trees, and Talia Zedek, and Thurston, and a bunch of other people wrote some liner notes, and so the band started playing again. So we've been doing shows. We did a tour with Dinosaur Jr., and it's been really fun. The first show we did back, it was wild. I was looking on the stage and I was like, these are the guys that I've known for like almost 40 years. You know, it was wild.
Yes, it was interesting because having done this show, initially there wasn't that much real interest in the 80s indie scene.
Yeah.
And then sort of that was 7-8 years ago, but now it's just like everyone's gone back and is discovering it, and there's like little festivals that people putting on, and you know, even the Sex Pistols have reformed with a new singer, haven't they? And you know, everybody suddenly realizes there's kind of good times to be had, and probably there's an audience.
Yeah, no, people. We just did a music festival, the Colossus Festival in New York, and it was packed, and we blew the roof off, and it was a really joyous, fun time, and it was really wonderful. So
what's the lineup of the band now?
So it's like 3/4 original. So it's myself, Lyle Heisen, the drummer, Dave Thomas, the bass player, and we have a different guitar player, Diego Ramirez. So he's new, but it's funny because Alex, the original guitar player, was Brazilian, and the guitar player we have now is from Argentina. So we kept the South American.
Yeah, that's nice. It's good to see. And are you sort of looking to archive your back catalogue now and sort of putting together some lovely box set?
Yeah, that's what we've been talking about. We have a lot of unreleased stuff. We want to re-release things. We have a live album from CBGB's that we never released. That we back in the day it was going to be an Australian release, but it never worked out. So we're working on that, and we actually went in the studio not too long ago and recorded some new material, and we're trying to figure out what we're going to do with that. And so it's been really great to reconnect with the guys. It's been very inspiring. Everyone's playing great.
Had you sort of not seen each other for decades before the
touch on and off, but not super close. You know, we're always friendly, but you know, I kind of moved around a lot, so I didn't really see them that much. And then we kind of, you know, but always very friendly. Like they came to my wedding, and I went to the guys' weddings when they got married and stuff like that. But it's been really great, and it's been really wonderful. It's nothing like, you know, I play with a lot of people and stuff, but there's nothing like the feeling of playing with someone that you have played with and have known that long. It's like a really special bond, you know.
Yes. And did everyone sort of keep their foot, toe, finger in the world of music? So picking it up again hasn't been that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. All the guys have done a lot of different stuff. Dave was in a band called Cell, and Lyle and Dave have another band, this kind of post-rock band called Royal Arctic Institute, which is great. So those guys, you know, they work hard. They've really never stopped playing as well. So
yes, and if you put out new material, will you put that on Bandcamp?
Probably. I don't know. Should we? We're trying.
It seems to be the go-to place for people now, isn't it? Bandcamp.
Yeah. I know a lot of people do that, but I think so. But it's been great. It's been really, really fun. And it's been a trip, you know, working on new stuff and with the guys. You know, it's just so interesting, the evolution of everything.
Yes. And are you going into the studio much, recorded with people at the at this moment in Nashville? Yeah,
I just finished a new single that BB did that's coming out. We just finished it this weekend. And I work, you know, I do a lot of like behind the scenes stuff, like musical directing and producing and co-writing with people. And, you know, it's kind of the stuff. Nashville's big on that. Like you do a lot of different musical roles. So I do that. So I'm very active. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, look, this has been fantastic. Well, thank you ever so much for your time. This has been amazing to hear your story and, yes, to sort of discover some more of your work, actually. That's been great. And it's great that it's not just something that's completely in the past, but actually sort of moving forward as well.
Yeah, no, it's it's kind of full circle, like it's interesting. I feel like my life right now is at a point where it's like the past, present, and future all connect, which is kind of wonderful.
Yes, absolutely. And did you archive much from your period of during that 80s and early 90s period?
Like the Damen stuff.
Yes, with I don't know, pictures, posters,
Oh, yeah,
flyers.
absolutely. Yeah, not so much me. I'm much better at that now. But the other guys, Lyle is the drummer, especially. He has a lot of stuff. We have great pictures and flyers and T-shirts and all the stuff.
Yes. Have you
But
got any plans to do a box set retrospective?
yeah, we're talking about it. I mean, we have a lot of stuff, and I'll have to send you one of the re-released EPs
Yes.
because it's like the old music, and then there were some tracks that weren't finished, and so instead of trying to like pretend that we were 18 again, like we got guest people to finish it. Like I was telling you, like Des Cadena and Gary Lee and Talia Zedek, and we got a bunch of people from the period I told you about, Thurston and stuff, that kind of wrote things that kind of put the record in like they didn't just write about the band, but they kind of wrote about the historical context of the time, which to me like makes it really interesting. We have like a little fanzine in the record. I thought it came out really cool.
Oh, fantastic. Well, this has been great. Well,
Yeah.
look forward to that. And if you do send it through, it'll be brilliant to hear it. But I'll, listen to your other sort of musical projects with, do you say BB?
Stuff out there.
Yes. Anyway, look, have a lovely evening. I'm going to go to bed now. Indeed, so true. And a little bit more detail than you need. But anyway, a massive thank you to Jim for giving me the time for that interview. If you want to know any more information, just sort of go to their social media platform sites and you'll find out what they're up to at this very moment. This has been the C86 Show. If you want to contact me, you can on any of the social media platform sites. Just do C86 Show. David Eastaugh, it's all good. And all these interviews have been archived on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. It's true. Have a great week. Stay safe.